Terrence, can the folks, oh, okay. Can the folks hear us right now? Great, okay.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Terrence Woodson, and I am one of the events and program managers here at the Seattle Chamber of Commerce. And I want to welcome all of you to our second Recalibrate Symposium. Recalibrate is the new diversity, equity, and inclusion program here at the Seattle Chamber of Commerce. Our Recalibrate Symposiums provide chamber members with a deeper understanding of DEI best practices. Before I begin, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Boeing. I would also like to thank our event sponsors, BECU, Business Health Trust, the Expedia Group, and Reach King County. Before we begin, I want to review a few group norms for this webinar. One, we acknowledge our own biases. Two, everyone will actively participate. Three, we will educate each other with care. And four, we value progress over perfection. Now, a few webinar logistics. If you need technical help, please use the chat box and me or Hannah will assist you. If you have questions for our great panel, please use the question and answer box. And we will record and post the event. We will record and post the webinar on our event page. And I'll also send out that link with the post-event email that all of you will get. And also, our three panelists have sent me a bunch of great links to a lot of great information. So I'll include some of that in the chat during the webinar. Then I'll also include those links in the post-event email. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Kevin Henry. Kevin is the Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator at Sound Healthcare. Kevin worked for over 20 years at the City of Bellevue, where he pretty much started the DEI department there. He initiated, grew, and managed all the DEI strategy, programs, and initiatives for the city. Kevin is also a journalist. He's a keynote speaker, facilitator, career coach, and media host. And he has produced and presented radio programs at local radio stations such as KBCS. So Kevin, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot. And thanks for having me and our esteemed panelists. Before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about who you'll be hearing from today. And I'm really happy to collaborate with them for what would be the first of many, many collaborations and panels that we might be on. Priya Frank is the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the Seattle Art Museum, where her focus is on organizational development, program curation, and racial equity-related initiatives. Her previous work at Lucid Lounge, UW Bothell, UW Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity, and Meany Hall for the Performing Arts have influenced her passion and heart for this work. Priya was named one of 2018's most influential people by Seattle Magazine, bravo, and made the Puget Sound Business Journal's 40 Under 40 list in 2019. Welcome, Priya.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Diem Lee is the Director of Community Investment and External Affairs at Comcast NBC Universal. Previously, she was the External Affairs Manager at Comcast NBC Universal and the Editor-in-Chief and Executive Director at the International Examiner, which is the oldest and largest Pan-Asian Pacific American publication in the Pan-Asian Pacific American publication in the Pacific Northwest. Diem has a BS degree from the University of Washington and is currently pursuing her executive MBA at the University of Washington. Welcome.
Thank you, glad to be here.
So before we get started, I just wanted to say that the last year has been quite surreal, very disturbing, very unsettling in a lot of ways. But I also think that it's presented an opportunity to talk about a lot of issues that have been in our society for a long time, but have not been addressed. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's like when you don't put oil in your car every 5,000 miles and it starts making that little noise and eventually your engine blows up. So I think 2020 was the engine blowing up, probably. And as you can see, if you follow the news, it's still going on with some recent shootings and the death of a 20-year-old young man in Minnesota. So those issues are there and they need to be addressed. Excuse me. So we have a series of questions, but we really want this to be more of a conversation. And at some point, we'll be addressing questions. I think we have a Q&A section that we can get into. But since you all represent organizations, you play a critical role in addressing the race and social justice issues that are affecting all of us on some level. So I just wanted to start off and give the panel the first question here on my list, and then we can just kind of go from there. Let's look at the big picture. What does an organization that is committed to DEI work look like? What are they doing to show the proof that they are truly committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Who would like to go first?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks so much for having us here today. You know, I think, Kevin, it's right on. Like, this is not something new. I think it's, it's something that's coming to the forefront only now, but this has been ongoing for so many years and so many generations, and it's just fascinating and horrifying in a lot of ways to see it just now coming to light. And so doing this work during this time, I mean, it's challenging. It's also allowing us to see the importance of what this work means to organizations and what it means to do this work authentically, because folks are being called out. And I think that it's long overdue, to be honest with you. Doing this work takes on authenticity, it takes commitment, it takes dedication, and it takes a whole different type of mindset to do. This is not just about checking the box and doing the things and the, sort of like, okay, so what do we need to do to get here? Done. No, it's a whole different frame of mind. And it's a whole different type of skill set, but it's also about like the humanness. It's about relationships. It's about empathy. It's about what it means to care for each other, even if your experience is different from somebody else's. And I think that that's really come to light as far as what it means to be an ally or an accomplice. I think, part of what it means to be an organization that's dedicated to this, it's about what it means and what it looks like on an every single day basis. It's not just my job, it's all of our jobs. And that's been made really clear by our CEO and director of the Seattle Art Museum. Amada Cruz. And even prior to that, with Kim Rorschach, who is our former director and CEO, who really prioritized this work. We at the Seattle Art Museum, we have been able to trace back different efforts around equity related work and community building to, I would say, around the 90s with different community organizations we've worked with and different partnerships. But I think it's intensified, obviously, more recently, but we've been doing quite a bit of work since then, honestly. Sandra Jackson Dumont, who was the director of education that came in the early 2000s, really set a high standard for what that work looks like within a museum. And ever since then, it's just kind of gone up and up and up. But really, an organization that's doing this work authentically is doing it from every facet. So what it means to do this, whether you're at the director level, whether you're doing communications work, whether you're doing HR work, it's all of our jobs. And I think, coming into this position, I'd been working at the Art Museum doing this work for about 5 years. But coming into this new position and new role last summer, it was about making sure, yes, I'm in this position, but it's not just my responsibility, it's all of ours. And how is that being reflected in the mission, the vision, the values of the organizations, in the way we conduct ourselves in our meetings? What is sort of the culture of this organization, and what are we doing to build a more inclusive culture, an inclusive environment in all of our departments? And so that's been a lot of the work I've been doing more recently, but it's really about so much seed planting that's happened. We have an equity team that started 5 years ago, and those are folks from all over the museum that are part of this group. And really this group is around really doing this work regardless of what our positions are, and centering racial equity within all that we do. And so this group has been just instrumental in that seed planting that I'm talking about. And so what does that look like? How does this work show up in each of our departments? And what does it look like to foster an environment that really centers equity and social change within that? And so everyone has a part to play, and everyone has a responsibility. And this is not just work that's on the side, but it really needs to be the central point upon which the foundation of the organization is built or rebuilt. And it cannot be on the side. Otherwise, it's not going to work in the long term.
Right. It's got to be baked into the organization and permeate throughout the organization. And I think you brought up a good point by saying it's got to be, everybody plays a role, and it starts at the top, I believe, and that it's got to trickle down, because if it starts from the top, then it becomes a priority. And then people realize within the organization that it is a priority, and they understand the why of why they're doing what they're doing. Because sometimes just doing something without understanding the reason behind it and the impact, you're not going to be as effective. And you mentioned something about it's a human issue. And this is something that we're going to get into a little bit later. But I know there was a question that had to do with, raised the question of politics. Sometimes people say, well, I don't want politics invading my football game or my meeting. This is a human issue. It's not a political issue. This is about doing the right thing, and it's about humanity. Dean, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So the question is, what does an organization that is committed to DE&I look like? I think it requires a courageous culture. I'll just take this a couple steps back, right? Before we get too tactical. It requires confident leadership too. To your point, Kevin, it starts at the top because it has to be modeled. It has to be reinforced every day, all the time, right? And so there has to be a level of confidence in the leadership to have these kinds of conversations, to embed it into your mission, into your business practices. And it requires, through that confidence, I think it requires a lot of humility too. And we won't know all the answers. We won't know everything that's the right thing to do. We won't know if this program works. We won't know if that initiative works. We don't know if everyone's going to be on the same page, in the same, in the same part of the journey together. They just won't be. If you have 5 members that's on your staff, or you have 4,000, 5,000, 10,000, not everyone's going to be in the same place. So it's just cutting yourself some slack, cutting some slack to some of the employees that you've designated to advance this mission. But I think it requires a lot of humility. And if your organization has not yet invested in the emotional intelligence of its employees, it's time to do that. And maybe it has been done. I'm sure many organizations, a lot of folks represented in this webinar now have done that to some degree, but if you haven't yet, I would start with that first before you dive into D&I. D&I will be embedded throughout that, but I would start with the emotional intelligence of your employees as well. If you don't have that as a foundation for people to have a safe place to have these kinds of conversations, and you can't build that trust with each other and empower one another, these kinds of conversations will go awry.
Mm-hmm. Well, I always tell people you have to look inward before you look outward, and you have to understand your own implicit bias, your own lens that you look at the world through. Because I think a lot of racism or bias, it's very subconscious. It's not something that the person is necessarily aware of. And I know it sounds where I'm the DEI person over there, we have sharing circles where we just bring our employees together along with the CEO, and we just talk about what we're feeling. We talk about BLM. We talk about what's going on out, in the streets. One question I had was, once you've decided that you're full on, you're going to dive in the deep end of the pool here, how can you translate that to the community? How can the community, your clients, your customers, your colleagues, your partnerships, how can they see what you're doing and feel comfortable and secure that you're doing it the right way? Any thoughts about that? I mean, I know we talk about, everybody's got a mission statement. We've got a vision statement. We've got a mission statement. We have our annual Dr. Martin Luther King diversity breakfast. But so many people, even in my work, when I was at the city of Bellevue, I had to spend a fair amount of time doing outreach and media interviews, letting people know, because I think sometimes what organizations or even cities don't realize is their perception of themselves isn't necessarily what the community thinks. And when I worked in Bellevue, Bellevue has this stigma. And I would tell people about the Bellevue diversity program and they'd laugh. They said, Bellevue has no diversity. And then I had to kind of educate them. So some of your thoughts about that.
I mean, just kind of along the same lines as what you were just sharing now, Kevin, is there's such a strong desire to go tactical. What do we do? What initiative do we want to deploy? Who do we want to hire? How do we want to change this before getting to the purpose and the why? And so if you already have volunteer programs, charitable giving, you have community engagement programs and all these other things, you already have that built into your system, that's great. Continue to do that, but don't forget to focus on the why. What is the purpose behind this? And tie it back into your mission, whether you're a nonprofit, for-profit business, whatever it may be, small and large, you have to tie it back to your operating principles as an organization, because otherwise people will see this as separate, a different department, a different mission, a trend, who knows what, but it has to tie back. And that's the way to make it much more sustainable and for people to kind of connect the dots a little bit easier. Priya?
I completely agree. My background is around community engagement work, philanthropy, and a lot of this is about listening. It's about really being invested in the community and what does that look like? Not just the assumption of here's what I think the community needs, but really actually asking and being entrenched authentically into community to really be able to listen and understand what the needs of our community is, and then being able to authentically address those needs and build those relationships. So it's not just like, me reaching out to somebody for a Black History Month program. Like, no, that's not actually how it works. It's, you know, let's start these conversations. Let's see what kind of connectivity there is. And let's build out those relationships over time so that, you know, when things come up or when a program or an exhibition in our case, or a, you know, a performance is coming that feels relevant, it's an easier and it's a more natural connection. It's a more organic way of working together as opposed to something that's forced and feels sort of superficial and on the surface, right? So it's like, it's taking that time and that investment in the folks and the community that you are wanting to build a relationship with. And that happens, you know, long before what you actually see externally. And I have, you know, I truly believe that that's a way of being able to more authentically do this work and then be able to be like, well, maybe maybe there's a story, because the thing is, it's like, do you have a story even to tell at this point? If you were just, you know, if it's, you know, like I mentioned earlier, you know, many organizations, corporations have been called out because they maybe made a statement, right? But what have they been doing to invest in this work prior to June, you know, late May, June of 2020? What's, you know, what are the different ways that organizations have been really investing in this work in all of those different areas? And if that's not the case, then what has happened since that time? And how are you assessing the effectiveness, both internally within your culture and externally within the communities that you're looking to connect with?
Well, and going and connecting with those communities also means getting out of your comfort zone. I remember even when I was working in Bellevue, and I worked there for 20 years. And in the early years, there was this tendency, because we had this nice city hall, we were inviting immigrants, we were inviting people of color, we were inviting these diverse groups, come to City Hall, we'll give you some coffee and a donut, and we'll tell you all about City Hall. And I would say, you know, we've got to leave City Hall and we've got to go to a church service, or we've got to go to a delicatessen, or I've even done presentations at happy hours at a bar, because that's where the audience was. You have to get out of your comfort zone, leave the building and go into their communities and show some credibility.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if you don't do that, and if you ignore what's going on outside with George Floyd and with the protests and with what's just happened this past weekend, and you don't react to that, then what that says to the community is that that's not important. You've got other things that are more important. It's not political. One thing I wanted to ask is about budget, because I think this ties into just how committed and serious are you. You know, I've run into nonprofits, and I understand there's budget constraints, but like, well, could you get somebody to come in for free and, you know, talk to this group for 25 minutes about diversity and we can check the box? What about budget? What are your feelings about what financially the commitment should be when it comes to DEI?
I don't know about Priya, but you know, I think a similar journey that many organizations have gone on is this all started with this all employee driven. With no budget. This is kind of pulled together a group of highly engaged employees who care about this as human beings. They know that this can transform the culture. They spend a lot of their own time on this. They bring it back to the organization's mission, and they present it to leadership. They ask for budget. I mean, I remember for our company, we spent a few years launching employee resource groups, right? Our own version of affinity groups. We established a diversity, equity, and inclusion council. This is all employee driven, right? And we didn't really know exactly how this was going to work. We just knew that we all cared about this. We all represented different functions in the company. So we all had different perspectives and goals in mind. But after a few years, I remember we created this a presentation for what we would call our CEO for Washington. We said, we've spent a couple of years on this. We've launched a couple of employee resource groups. We're seeing some great outcomes. Employees are engaged in the community. We're seeing our culture change. We're seeing trainings happening. Leadership is on board. But we also have day jobs. And I know a lot of folks can relate to this, right? is, but we also have day jobs that we're responsible for. We need full-time folks on this. And I remember a specific occasion where our CEO for Washington said, I agree. I'm seeing the outcomes too. I'm seeing the culture change too. Now, this is after a couple of years, right? This didn't happen overnight, right? And she said, we need to invest in this. So we got one person. No, but that's full-time. That's accountability. That's ownership. That's outcomes. And now we have the opportunity to work with this person and build out our D&I council even more, have real goals, objectives, outcomes, all that we can report and track and build on. And so I know for us, it was difficult. It wasn't an easy process because there was no budget. Organizations don't start with a budget on this, right? It's more like values. It's values that you build into the culture. How do you put a monetary amount on that? But if you can make the case for it, as I'm sure many organizations have, I think I was reading more about you, Priya, and I saw you all had done something similar too. You make the case, you build the case for it. And over time, if you can get the buy-in from your leadership too, you can get the budget and the capacity needed. I don't know if you have more to add on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that actually attracted me to Seattle Art Museum in the first place, when before I started there, was really because I saw a position that was partially dedicated specifically to this work. And it was, and that was an indication to me that an organization is taking this seriously when they're putting funding for a position behind it. It's not just the talk, right? It's putting the funding behind it. And so that is something that kind of indicated to me that this is an organization that is wanting to do this work and actually invest in it authentically. And so that was something that really attracted me to why I wanted to work at SAM in the first place. Certainly like over time, and like DM said, like it's not something that was a line item in our budgets, right? But I know our former director, Kim, she was very much like, this is a priority. We need to build this into our budget and figure out a way to do it. And it can't just come from when, okay, we're going to receive extra grants or we're going to, and of course that's part of it, but where can we carve out this funding for, say, our emerging arts leader internships, like right now, because we need to make this commitment right now and we need to find the money for it. And so being able to sort of have that, again, come from the top, be a priority, and folks recognizing that it's instrumental to how we move this work forward is having space in your budgets for this. And certain times when, there isn't budget, then we work we cross collaborate between departments and be like, this is something that's beneficial for all of us. Everyone puts in a little bit and we're able to bring in the trainer or, that kind of thing too. So again, it's the recognition that this is everyone's work and how do we work together to move this forward. I think that's been really key and allowing us to be able to do what we've done. And also definitely like thinking about when I came into this position last summer, I mean, this new role is something we've been talking about and trying to figure out how to get me to for a few years, and so it's something that takes planning. It does take time, but also, coming into this position last summer with the pandemic, with racial reckoning, with so many different obstacles, it's like, okay, so what does success look like? And what can we do now while within the processes and within the work that we're already doing? And what's going to take more budget, time, resources. So that's, looking out longer term within our planning. So what can we fold in right now that we're already doing? And how do we make sure we're using an equity lens on our current processes while planning out for the future when we are, financially in a better space post-pandemic.
Well, and while we're talking about buy-in and, internal engagement, which is critical, there's a couple of questions that have come from the audience. One has to do with, it says, our DEI committee was also thinking about doing sharing circles. We raised that idea that it should be limited to a small number of people, like 5 or 6, to be more effective and let the participants participate. What do you think of limiting participants? I think that personally, for us at Sound, we like it when it's about 5 to 8 people. We have about an hour. When it's less people, people are more likely to process and engage and spend more time, as opposed to the 50-person Zoom call. The other thing that we've done is we've broken it up into 3 different sharing circles. One is an African-American share, well, actually 4 now. A African-American sharing circle, a white allies sharing circle, a general sharing circle where everybody is invited. And then we just started an Asian American Pacific Islander. And so those circles are safe zones. So we do whatever we can to encourage people to be more vulnerable and more open. And that's really important, especially from a cultural standpoint, because in different cultures, we're kind of used to the American way of life, and you go for what you want and you speak up. Well, that's not the case with everyone. So we really have to listen to people and ask them, what is the most comfortable way that we can engage? So any thoughts about from the panel here before we get to the next question about just those, you call them affinity groups and resource groups. Well, what are the keys to really making those work?
I mean, there's so many different ways. I mean, I would agree that the smaller the group, the more intimate the conversation can be, the safer it'll be. I think it's critical to at least kick off the conversation, perhaps with, say that you have an all employee meeting, right? An all staff meeting. I think it's important that people hear from the leadership to set the tone for that, to have strong facilitators, to have good ground rules around the conversations, and then breaking out into sessions, smaller groups, smaller breakout sessions. It could be virtual in the future. Maybe this can be in person. But I would agree, smaller groups are better for these kinds of conversations. But having a strong facilitator for each breakout session is really critical. Otherwise, the conversation, I mean, it could go in any direction. So strong facilitation is important.
I know for us, so our equity team, which is about 40 people from across the museum, and we meet once a month as a whole group, and then there's work that happens outside of that. I do find that it's most effective, like when I'm needing feedback on something or a conversation, rather than having everyone in there to do breakout sessions. That really helps, and then come back and report out. I completely agree that hearing from leadership around, whatever it might be, or recognizing sort of what's happening in our world, being able to call that out and recognize this just happened, for example, the latest murder in Minnesota, and, recognizing what that is, and then having care resources sent out to our staff, for example, of here's therapy or mental health resources that are covered by our insurance. Here's BIPOC therapists and counselors that are available in our community. If you don't have insurance, here's some resources that can be given. So it's kind of like these multiple touch points of engaging around support. And again, this is not political. This is literally human, and how we are dealing with so much trauma. And Kevin, I'm sure you could speak to this, but the trauma that folks have been experiencing, and then coming to work, putting on the work face, and then on the Zoom calls and all the things, it's just, there's something wrong there if we're not recognizing what's happening in our world and being able to call that out and recognize the pain and the difficulties and challenges that people and their families are going through right now. And so what are the ways that we as an organization or company can make sure that we're continuing to have those conversations and resources, and that there's multiple entry points for that, because not everyone's going to want to be involved in the group conversation. Not everyone's going to want to, you know, that's not everyone's thing. And so what are like some different touch points of being able to acknowledge and recognize what's going on, and that we as an organization see and we feel this too. So I think that that's really important as well. I also think something that we have been, because transparency is a huge thing, right? Of like, you know, from leadership. And that's, I feel like at our organization, that's being called for much more of like, what are the different processes, and what are the things that people are experiencing? It kind of goes back to the listening, right? Like not just assuming that you know what your people need and want, but asking them. And so we've been doing more like debrief sessions or feedback gathering for particular equity related initiatives and issues. And so being able to kind of get feedback around different committee processes or the experiences of staff being on particular committees and what that was like, both positive and negative, so that we can work on those things and do better next time. But we have to have a place to start, and we have to have spaces for listening where we can gather that information to then be able to do better.
If I can share another option as well.
Please do.
It brings up so many good points. That, for our company, we have a DE&I day coming up. And the way they're approaching it is because not everyone is comfortable in discussion, right? Not everyone is comfortable having this conversation. And that as a part of that DE&I day is there's a portal where people can access different videos, readings, suggested books, all kinds of things that depending on what resonates with you, where you're at in the journey, you self-select, right? And then there is time that's carved out for a few hours where people can have independent time. So we're actually taking time out of the business to invest in this so that people can have their own self-reflection, their own study, their own time to read. And that's a big deal for any size organization, right? You're pulling people out away from their time doing their other job functions to take time to reflect, because let's be honest, like we don't have a whole lot of time to reflect. Unless this is your lived experience or this is your job, like Priya and Kevin, this is your everyday, right? But for many folks, this may not be. It's only time. And so I actually find that to be pretty effective, is to carve out that 2-3 hours of just independent study time, watching videos, back to your own team and what you took away from that. And just giving people the opportunity to self-select what they kind of process where they're at in the journey.
Well, I feel like it's got to be like the same kind of commitment that people make in going to the gym, even though we can't go to the gym right now, really. But that type of mentality where, you know, I know people that every day they get up and they at 5 o'clock, they're at the gym, or they go for their walk every day. It's got to be that kind of commitment. For me, it's much like being a parent. You know, you're not a part-time parent, you're always a parent. Now, there's times when you really have to focus on an issue or whatever, but you never stop being a parent, and you're really a parent 24/7. So I think we've all got to be prepared to react to different things that happen and find our comfort zone. Like I remember talking to an employee at Sound, she said, well, you know, she was white, and she said, well, you know, I want to help, I want to stand up to racism, but I don't feel comfortable necessarily marching in the streets. I said, you don't have to march. There's all kinds of different ways you can do this. You can form a book club. You can watch a documentary. Instead of going to Albertsons, you can go to a Black-owned business to shop or something. And there's all kinds of different ways that you can start to change the lens, change your lens, and start seeing the world differently. But you can't do that unless you have proximity and interaction with people. Otherwise, you're just watching YouTube and the news, and that's where you're getting all your influences from. Another question was, small and mid-sized companies don't have the resources as big corporations, government, and nonprofits have. What types of resources would you share that allows these entities to continue building their DEI incentives in the communities they work with to build profits and securing jobs, helping businesses and local communities alike. So I think it's that kind of a limited budget question. I mean, I know that there's grants that have been popping up, but I think partnerships. I remember when I was in Bellevue, we did a radio show for 7 years called Voices of Diversity, and we didn't pay a dime for it to put on a weekly radio show, because we partnered with Bellevue College and we used their advanced television and radio production students. So sometimes I think by just starting to talk to people, sometimes there's ways that you can actually accomplish things without necessarily having to have a big budget. What do you think?
I mean, I completely agree. Coming from, a nonprofit and a fundraising background as well, so much like we talked about earlier, it's about the investment in the community. And so like through lots of different ways. So, even just this panel, for example, right? Like the three of us getting to connect with each other and how I know we'll be in touch, and it's exciting to be able to have partners in the community that are doing similar work and what that looks like in different avenues, whether it's Comcast or whether it's, mental health, whether it's, an art museum, but a lot of sort of the values that are values that we share, right? And so being able to build those connections and to do those authentically, not just for something that I can get from you, but how do we work together to build out this vision for what it means to be a healthy community, right? And so having those values and being able to walk in those values and to display those to, as we're talking, as we're developing our relationships, I think that is really key. I just wanted to address something quickly of what we were mentioning before. It's looking around of like is your everyday, who is in your everyday, right? Like who are you sitting around your kitchen table with? Who are you interacting with on an everyday basis? Who are you, do those folks look similar to you? Are they, your similar socioeconomic background? Like the work starts with ourselves, right? That investment of doing, reading or like the gym. I mean, that starts with the self. And so it's one thing to jump to what can I do in my organization, but what are you investing in within yourself first and your own family? What are the conversations that you're having? Where are you going when you go out for fun? Or when you go see a play, or when are the majority of the people, are they more like, do they look like you, or are you able to get out and be more a part of the community and have important conversations, recognize different perspectives and points of view? Like that's just such a simple like starting point, is to like recognize who is my community, and maybe I need to expand that a little bit and do more authentic work externally and out, with my own group first before I'm trying to like do all this work within my organization. I just,
Like a
the
personal
reflection piece is so huge.
I call it a personal audit, really, is to really examine on, like you say, a daily basis. Who do I talk to when I look to hire somebody? Who am I hiring? I mean, sometimes I've asked organizations, who are your vendors? Are they minority vendors, or are they just the people that you've just always worked with for 20 years?
Mm-hmm.
DM, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd agree. If you're looking at it from an organization standpoint, I mean, many of the folks that are in this webinar are representing organizations, right? And looking at your own business or nonprofit practices, just looking at first, that requires staff time, but that doesn't require a budget necessarily. With that, assess where you're at so far. Look at the vendors that you work with, to Kevin's point. Look at your volunteering opportunities and how you're engaging your employees. Look at the community partners. What mission out there would really resonate with your employees? That doesn't cost a whole lot. you got to feed your volunteers, but that's kind of it, right? But getting folks out into the community to see for themselves is probably even more effective than any training you can dump on any employee group right away. People have to experience it for themselves. So to Priya's point, they're going on their own personal journey. They need to experience it for themselves. They need to see the integration with their work as well. So having folks go out into community, try some volunteer projects, look at your own business practices. How could that be changed, different? Look at your policies, kind of look at them through a fresh lens. You might be surprised, there could be some practices in place that are already where they should be. And there's some that you think could be better. I'd also encourage pulling together, as we were touching on this a little bit earlier, is pulling together some engaged employees. Many organizations, you've already been hearing from some employees that say, hey, could we try this? Could we do that? Pull those employees together. Form a small council or committee of just a group of employees that are really engaged and see where it goes from there. For the majority of my professional career in working in DEI, community engagement, philanthropy, community journalism, it was with zero budget. Only the last few years, been blessed with a budget to support our employee resource groups, philanthropy, DEI efforts. But for the most of my professional career through the DEI lens has been with almost no budget, if any.
Same.
It's just, yeah, just like Priya, right? You're just getting people together that care, that are committed, that are dedicated, harness that. Find them at your organizations and harness that, and you might be surprised where that goes.
Well, and getting your board of directors involved as well is another thing. I mean, I've worked for so many organizations where the board of directors might as well have lived on a different planet, because the only time I ever saw them was when I looked at the website, even though I'm not saying they weren't doing what they were supposed to do, but sometimes there seems to be that separation. And again, to speak to an earlier point about making sure that everybody is involved in the mix here is so key. I know that we only have, I think, about like 8 or 9 minutes left and the questions are filling up. I did want to say that I put my email in the chat. Anybody on this call, feel free to call me, because I know we're not going to get to all of the issues really, and I'm happy to talk to somebody on an individual basis, but I did have one other question about the LGBTQ community. Is sometimes kind of left out of the mix. And to your point, when I think it was Adia mentioned it, and we both mentioned it was a human issue, how can we make sure that all communities, including people with disabilities, are kept in, kept in our organization in terms of addressing the issues that affect them as well? Some final thoughts about that.
For us, intersectionality is key.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if that's not something you're familiar with, please look that up. For us, at SAM, and particularly within the equity team and throughout the organization, we focus specifically on racial equity, because we recognize that when we start with race, everyone else benefits, but also recognizing the intersectional experiences of people. And so that's how that comes into play, is that recognition of intersectionality, and how we really focus our efforts in that way so that everyone can benefit as a result. I think I could go on, but I'm just going to leave it there for now.
Well, and I just wanted to throw in that at Sound, what we've done is we've had trainings and we paid close attention to personal pronouns. That's really a big deal in making sure that whether it be our new employees as part of their onboarding process or orientation, that is a priority, and that people need to be addressed by their personal pronouns, and also those personal pronouns are part of email signatures. We've had discussions about it, because very often what happens, and this goes back to the buy-in, people are like, well, I can't keep up with who wants to be called what, and that kind of thing. Well, we kind of gently indicate that part of your employment here is that you recognize and honor that, and that it is a journey, but at the same time, it's something that's just part of your employment. It has to be something where there's accountability involved. And we've had to address some people who didn't want to adhere to that. Any other thoughts? I don't know if we have like 5 minutes left, and then Terrence just kind of like shuts off our mics and our radios. How much time do we have, Terrence?
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left. I have a question that attendees sent beforehand that I do want to get to. So let me know when okay, great. So this attendee asked, can you offer advice, guidance on how to share with the public all of the DEI and A changes we've made as a staff in a performing arts organization? The public has been overwhelmed with political and social unrest and relies on our theater to provide as a place of joy and uplifting stories. While we've been closed to the public, our staff has been learning through professional DEI and A training how our organization can change to be more diverse, equitable, inclusive, and anti-racist. However, our audiences hear anti-racist and they interpret that to mean we have changed our mission to be a political theater. We are not. We are simply becoming aware of what being an anti-organization is. Words matter. They can divide us, and they can unite us. So what are your thoughts about that? I thought that was an interesting question and interesting place to be in for an organization.
Who wants to go first?
I mean, I do feel like we've addressed some of that already, of like, do you have a story to tell? And is that story authentic? I think also, this is not, like we said earlier, this is not about politics. This is about humanity. And I don't know how many times to say that. I mean, this is about, you know, Black folks dying, being murdered. This is about Asian and Asian American folks being targeted around hate. I mean, this is humanity. This isn't politics. And I guess I just don't know how to say it any other way. That how can we not, as arts organizations, be involved? The arts are one of the most powerful ways to be able to bring forward representation and visibility and the ability to make change happen through accessible ways. And so if as an organization, I mean, I think even just the thought of like, well, we're not a political organization, but like, I don't think you're ready to tell the story if that's your stance.
Yeah, I'd also add, I'd really caution all of us to not villainize the other, quote unquote, the other. When we say this is about politics, we're already creating division in the conversation. We're saying, oh, this must be a right issue. That must be the left. This must be Democrats. That must be Republicans. That must be the other people. Right? And so I think this is a special moment in time for us to reevaluate how we villainize other groups, entities, organizations, political parties, one another all the time. I get that this is human nature to do it. We put people in boxes so that we, you know, historically could survive, right? It was something that was built out of evolution, but I think it's the root of a lot of issues that we have today. And it's something we have to be so careful of. I think we're doing it also. I don't want to bring up too many, controversial topics, but, insert any issue out there today between parties, between entities, between missions, and it's because there's a villainization of that group. You could even take small business. Small businesses have been villainized for a really long time for being just for profit. All we care about is profit. I don't think anyone that is in this webinar right now believes that the only reason why you started a nonprofit, why you started a business, why it became a corporation is that all you cared about was profit. You felt like you had something to offer, right? And so I think we're all experiencing that to some degree, is this villainization and putting everyone else into the other box. You can't get people to the table if you already treat them as the other. You're already treating them as the other. They're not going to come to the table, right? And that's something that's my greatest worry, that it's going to take longer for all of us to heal because we continue to do it in every sphere.
I think that was very well said. And I think that the word journey has come up in the conversation a few times. And when I think of the arts, I learn from the arts. I learn things that I might not necessarily agree with. You don't have to agree with it, but just open yourself up to the journey and to experiencing and hearing someone else's story. I think there's way too much defensiveness sometimes. And for some reason, it's like one group's gain is another person's loss. It's not necessarily that. So I think I would just encourage people to stay open. Don't be afraid, be courageous, be anti-racist as opposed to just saying I'm not racist, because that's a very passive thing. And I compare it to somebody sitting in the stands and watching the game or getting down on the field. And when you get down on the field, just like in football, you're going to fumble, you're going to score a touchdown, and you're going to get hit in the mouth sometimes. But it's definitely worth the journey because it really is tied into the future of this country. And everybody's got to be involved no matter what your background is.
And staying relevant as an organization, right? Or a company. Like, do you want to get left behind or do you want to move forward? And I think that this is such a key part to what it means to be excellent and to do, quality work and to be, I think that's like the standard. And I think, being able to invest and do this work, it's part of what's needed in order to grow, in order to stay relevant within the communities that you're looking to be in service to. So it's just part of that journey, totally.
Any closing thoughts, Diem? And I'm gonna hand it back over to Terrence before he turns off our cameras. I think we're done, Terrence.
All right, great. Thank you. I want to thank Kevin, Diem, and Priya for this amazing conversation. We probably could have spent all afternoon here. Just to let our attendees know, I will be sending out a post-event email probably early next week. Kevin, Diem, and Priya all sent me links to resources, so I'll send all that out. Kevin and Priya were gracious enough to send their email, so if you want to connect with them personally, please do if you have follow-up questions. Also, when you click end to this webinar, there will be a short survey. If you have a couple minutes, please fill that out and definitely let me know what DEI topics you want us to present on, and if you know of any speakers that you would like to hear. I would greatly appreciate hearing from our members. So before we end, I just want to say a big thank you once again to our sponsor, Boeing, and look out for the next Recalibrate event. It'll probably be in sometime in June. So thank you all, and go out and enjoy the sunshine. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you all.